Hello and welcome to the second gathering of Spiritually Speaking with Father Joel Maiorano. Did I say that right?
Yes, you
There's
did.
so many vowels in your name, Joel.
Well,
We're going to say Maiorano.
We could afford vowels at the time.
That's nice. And I am Pastor Stacy Shelton. Joel serves as the Director of Spiritual Care and Well-Being at the Rogue Valley Manor here in Medford, and I am the Senior Pastor at Medford First Christian Church. And we're coming together today to talk a little bit about this week's lectionary text, which comes from the book of John. And Joel's going to read that in a minute. But first...
Well, you know, I've got insecurity issues being in your big office.
Yes.
With all these books that I decided to bring a little bit of swag from my background and just take over some real estate. And so if you'll notice, I got my Detroit Tigers hat here. Shout out to the Tigers. And then I spent 18 years in Kansas. So I got my Kansas motorcycle plate.
Gotta have that. Yes, very nice. I have a little chip on my shoulder about Detroit. I'm going to try and be open because I like Joel, but we'll see how long that stays. Yeah. I'll try not to graffiti it in the hour that we're together.
Yeah, that stuff will be donated to the Goodwill before I leave. Yeah.
It will not.
Yeah. One addition, I did change my socks. I wore black socks this week because my boss made fun of me.
Oh!
So I just want to make sure the camera gets my...
And are they both black? Because that's...
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Who can say? All right. Father Joel is going to read to us from John 10, right?
John 10, 1 through 10. The Gospel of John, chapter 10, verses 1 through 10. John writes, "Verily, truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him, because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice." Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore Jesus said again, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Well, so we have Jesus is talking with the Pharisees, and we'll get back to that in a moment, but he starts talking about this analogy of the sheepfold, and that no one comes to the sheepfold but through the gate. Talks about bandits and thieves entering, but the shepherd is the one that we're looking for. Beautiful imagery in this text about how the shepherd knows this, his sheep, and the sheep know the sound of the shepherd's voice. Tells the story of how they're living this lovely life, the sheep in the sheepfold, and then realizes that the listeners aren't getting it. So he has to kind of break it down for them. I have to say, the first time that I read this, I really thought I was getting it. And then when I read the part about Jesus breaking it down, I was like, oh, evidently I didn't get it. Because I automatically go to Jesus as the shepherd. This is an image that we dwell in a lot. And so even though it didn't say that, my brain said it said that. And so then all of a sudden Jesus says, very truly, I tell you, I'm the gate for the sheep. not as beautiful of an image. If you're a visual person like I am, the little Jesus face on the gate isn't as nice as Jesus the Good Shepherd is. But he says he is the gate, and they come in and go out according to the gate, and the gate keeps the sheep safe from the bandits and thieves. And then it ends with kind of this image of protection that Jesus offers, that the gate is protective of the sheep. One of the things that I want to make sure that we remember about this text is that it isn't in a bubble all by itself. The text is existing in a broader story, and so right before we hear this story of the sheep and the gate and the shepherds, Jesus heals a blind man, and the Pharisees are pretty dang unhappy with how he went about that. And as far as we know, he's still hanging out there talking to them after that healing has happened and after they have questioned him. And then he comes to this text about how the sheep are taken care of. And I find that to be somewhat intriguing. Looking at this text, what is this story saying to those Pharisees? And why is he choosing this as the story to tell in the midst of that occurrence? I think there's probably a reason.
That this text is really linked to chapter 9. Before we even broke the Gospels down in the chapters, this story was actually one story. And so in order to understand chapter 10, 1 through 10, you got to go back to the whole chapter of 9 and realize this is the context. And I think it's really important because as an evangelical, I oftentimes will gravitate towards something that speaks to my theology. And I've got to be really careful here because this context, I have to ask, okay, with the word saved, which could be redeemed, protected, healed, with this particular passage, I have to ask, okay, who's being saved and what are they being saved from? And you got to look at Jesus's words to the Pharisees. He's talking in relationship to chapter 9 and the healing of the blind man. And so the person who's being saved from both physical blindness and as well as marginalization or not belonging is the blind man. And what is he being saved from? Well, he's being saved from being excommunicated, not being one of them. And so that, along with, if we look at it a little deeper, we look at verse 16 that says, there's sheep in different pens. So, so there's different pens? Okay. And then finally, this is a passage of inclusion, not exclusion.
Yeah.
And so it's always an invitation. Jesus is offering an invitation to those who are being excluded from society to come in. And I think that's important to realize that the word salvation can't be ripped out of its context here. There's healing from the blindness. There's emotional healing. There's invitation, radical hospitality, invitation to come be part, and this sense of protection. I want to go back to what you said, and everything is context, context, context. I mean, we went to seminary and we looked at this $10 word called exegesis, which just means really interpretation. How are we going to interpret it? What are we going to bring into the text? But context, historical text, historical criticism, but context or contextual criticism is really important when you read scripture. And, historically in the Roman world, 70 to 80% of the Roman world were food insecure. So Jesus, in using the metaphor of sheep, is and pasture and protection, is pretty calming to possibly the hearers and the readers of this text.
Yeah, I had not thought about that correlation, but that is definitely true. Well, and I mean, shepherding was a pretty common job at the time. And so it would have been information that people were used to hearing, and a visualization of story that people could easily see. For us, most people don't spend a ton of time with sheep. I am an exception to that rule. One of my best friends is a sheep rancher, and I've spent quite a lot of time on the sheep ranch doing sheepy things. It's good.
You're blowing my stereotype here, Stacy. You're blowing my stereotype.
Well, I don't like being the analogy of me being a sheep, because I'm very familiar with them. They're just horribly smelly animals and dumb as rocks and super committed to their own death. And I don't like being that correlation. However, when I dwell in that a little bit, I do see the similarities, as much as I hate to admit that's true. It's a pretty intimate relationship between shepherd and sheep. They don't get away with much, I will say that. And one of the things about sheep is they do sort of get into trouble. And so they're just trying to find food. And they always think that the grass is greener somewhere else. So wherever they are, they're going to try and go somewhere else. One of the things about this text, talking about Jesus as the gate, as much as that's sort of a difficult visualization for me, when I think about those sheep and how they were always kind of stupidly trying to do weird stuff that they shouldn't be doing, and I think about that concept of the gate, I really like that the gate is there sort of as a protective measure, not as, and later, again, when you look at what comes before and after, later, as the analogy of Jesus as the good shepherd comes up, it talks about Jesus having other sheep that are brought into the fold. And to me, that was an important reminder that the gate isn't about keeping other sheep out. The gate is about keeping bandits and thieves out. And so other sheep should be welcome in, and are. And we also think of the gate in terms, at least I did, maybe other people don't, but I think of it in terms of it being closed. And I needed to kind of reformat how I thought about that, to see the gate was more often open than closed, but that when protection is needed, that's when the gate shows up.
Yeah, no, I when I read the passage and thought about it and did some reading, I saw the same thing. You know, we do have Jesus as a shepherd image, and we have Jesus as a gate image. And, you know, for me, gates oftentimes will help protect, like you say, protect us from even some of our own behaviors. And Jesus as a shepherd, you know, the gate opens and you lead the sheep into pasture, so there's provision. And so there's, you know, there's protection, there's provision, and there's opportunity.
Mm-hmm. I think that we need to be really careful to remember that we aren't the shepherd or the gate, because I think sometimes, especially clergy folk, get a little confused about where we land in the herd. And
you mean I'm not all that in a bag of chips?
Well, you are, but Jesus is a little bit more of that. And that Jesus is the one who takes care of the exclusion and inclusion, and over and over again in his message to us, we receive a repeated message of inclusion, and so for me, the attempt, and let me just say I mess this up with a great deal of regularity, is to err on the side of welcome and hospitality, and let Jesus take care of whatever's next, and kind of remembering that I am, while I might be, an assistant shepherd in some ways, I am not the good shepherd, and it isn't my job to sort.
Oh, you hit on it. Oh boy, yes, you definitely hit on it. One, I've got control issues, so I need to hear that I'm not the good shepherd. But two, even more importantly, in today's society, I think a lot of my pastoral care dealing with caregivers is they feel like it's their responsibility to take care of or to take on all responsibility for the care of others or for the care of their loved one. And this is a good way of saying, no, there is a good shepherd. You're not it.
Yeah, and I mean, let's take a gander at this little guy right here too, because he's carrying the sheep and we don't have to, you know. And I think in what you're saying, that reminder sometimes, that burden can be so heavy and we can forget that we don't have to do all of the lifting ourselves. I think that's a huge gift of compassion that we can give to ourselves as caregivers to let Jesus take some of that load. Yeah.
You know, the word sozo, you know, in the Greek also means to deliver, to heal, to protect, you know, to redeem. So there's so many ways that we can enter into this text and talk about what the Good Shepherd is doing.
Well, and as I was thinking about this text, I was trying to really picture what are the thieves and bandits for us today? What are the things that might come in? And I think of that as being like the things that distract us from relationship with Christ, and how do we view how Christ as the gate protects us in the midst of this. Just thinking about what those things are that are distracting. I think there's a lot of things, and in this time, anxiety seems to be one of my worst thieves of having that faithful relationship with Christ, as I try to maneuver through what church looks like. And you know, now they're starting to talk about opening things back up, and how will I keep, you know, people safe, and I do more heavy lifting on that maybe than I need to, but wanting to be responsible to that. So anxiety for me is one, and I know that I'm joined by many others in that as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, count me in on that one. You know, the thing that I think of when you were talking is that he called them by name. There's an intimacy there. There's a connectedness. There's little to no separation between the intimacy Jesus has with the sheep in this particular passage. And he calls them by name. So inductively, as I think about myself as being the sheep, I've got to be a good listener. And as a contemplative person, I really got to work on my listening skills so that I can hear my name being called. I can hear the still small voice of God.
Yeah. And it's so easy to get distracted. And you would think in this time where many people have sort of slowed down, it might be easier, but it doesn't. I mean, and I make choices too that make it louder.
Yeah.
You know, I choose to read the news too early in the morning too often, and that, you know, the volume seems to go up on life in those moments. Thinking about the intimacy, so going back to sheep ranching, my friend that was a sheep rancher, she milked sheep. And
hold on, wait a minute. You can, hold on, I'm from Detroit. You can milk sheep?
You can. Sheep and goats, I mean, they're similar animals, and so, yeah. And the cheese is a little different, I will say that, but it's good. It's really good. Milking sheep. One of the most intimate experiences I've ever had with an animal. I do not want to, there is something about it. There's a beauty in it. And there is a lot of disgusting stuff that goes on there. And just thinking about the kind of intimacy that we have with God, and as much as I would prefer that God see all of the beautiful parts of me, God also can, I do believe, see those other parts that maybe I wouldn't like to have so up close and personal with God. The amazing part to me is that God is okay with that. And for me, not a perfectionist, but I do like to have my best foot forward. to be okay with God accepting me just as I am today is sometimes a difficult concept to swallow.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
You know, the last thing I wanted to talk about was he's come in the full, or we can celebrate abundantly. You know, that word in itself, I mean, if you're going to target anything in this passage to say, let's rest here, let's put our stake here. Perissos is the Greek word, and it means, you know, not only in abundance, but superior, extraordinary, uncommon, surpassing. And so if I had a pitcher of water, I'd take the water, a pitcher, into a small glass and continue to pour the water over and over and over and over into the glass and watch it just come out like a reservoir bursting at the seams. I think that would be the image I'd use for what Jesus is saying here.
Right. That never-ending sense of life.
Never-ending sense of life. Fullest.
Yeah. Well, and so I think my challenge for this week, looking at this text, is around, because we're in a limited life experience right now. And so for me, the challenge is, as I'm living this this life of restriction, how can I do that and witness abundant life, you know, and really, last night, my family sat outside. We are all addicted to our phones, just up front. And last night we sat outside, beautiful evening before the rain started, and none of us had a phone anywhere in sight. We played and laughed and kind of drank in just being there together. And that time could go by without me noting it. And so for me, that's the invitation this week, is around paying attention. And then if I am noticing my head in my phone too often, to say, let's go outside, you know, to remind myself that I get to choose to live abundantly. It isn't just that Jesus is going to feed it to me, but I'm going to be open to it.
We got it. You know, I like your word. My challenge this week is that sometimes, you know, I'm the youngest in a family of 6 kids. I had to be quick. I had to stick my hand on the food table to, you know, on the supper table to get my food. I had to run faster than my brothers after I called them names. I take shortcuts, and oftentimes shortcuts look like someone who's a robber. And oftentimes I will try to sneak around gates, sneak around gates. And sometimes the only person I'm robbing from is myself. What am I stealing from myself during this time of coronavirus, during this time, even no coronavirus? What am I stealing from myself, going from activity A to activity B and going from transaction to transaction, that I limit relationship? So that's the text for me that I'm going to wrestle with this week.
Yeah. All right.
Well,
are we done?
Yeah, I think we're done. But you know, I just want to talk a little bit about our sponsors. We like to thank Dunder Mifflin Paper Company in Scranton, Pennsylvania, for their support, and Schrute Farms,
Yes.
Best Beets in America, for their ongoing support of this lectionary study.
Yeah.
Blessings.
Be well.